This video is brought to you by Paragon, my own original sci-fi novel, now available on Amazon. Check the description for links where you can buy. Time to look at an underrated, less well-known sci-fi series now. One which isn't about empires or space phenomena, but instead a series which follows the more human side of sci-fi. A show about a band of flawed characters trying to get by on an old rust bucket of a... no, not that one. Originally aired in 1997, Cowboy Bebop is a Japanese animated science fiction show directed by Shinichiro Watanabe and written by Keiko Nobumoto. The show follows bounty hunters Spike Spiegel and Jet Black as they attempt to make a living meandering throughout outer space. Along the way they encounter the time-displaced Faye Valentine, genius techie Edward, and the adorable floof Ein. Cowboy Bebop's presentation and world building are immediately striking, not just in the realms of science fiction, but also Japanese anime in general. Anime is known for a number of money-saving techniques which have become staples of the animation style, such as speed lines, panning across stills, and an overabundance of reaction shots. Cowboy Bebop, however, uses none of these. No speed lines, always some degree of movement, and tighter direction in dialogue scenes. It looks more like an anime movie than a show. Cowboy Bebop doesn't exactly move like Western Disney-esque animation, but it also doesn't quite move like your typical Japanese anime shows. Because Bebop spent so long in development hell, originally conceived by Bandai to sell space toys which then fell through, Watanabe often rallied his team to push the animation further than the standard. Being a largely self-contained story with no manga to keep up with, the creators behind Bebop were able to put more time and energy into every frame of each episode. As a result, much like the work of legendary directors like Katsuhiro Otomo, Cowboy Bebop's production values stand up better after more than 20 years than stuff released in the last 5. Smear frames, moving camera combined with excellent compositions, character and environment designs create moments of melancholy stillness which suddenly explode into frenetic action at the drop of a hat. The uniqueness in the animation is just one of the many stylistic flourishes which make Bebop so alluring as a show. The construction of the fictional universe itself feels like a remix pulling from a plethora of disparate sources. The core idea of bounty hunters hopping from place to place is right out of a classic western, and there are many visual allusions to this. However, the aesthetic is closer to the film noir of the 30s and 40s, with the colour and sound of 60s jazz and blues, but a storytelling philosophy which remains strictly Eastern. Now, while these elements may seem like a strange combination, each part serves a specific purpose within the stories and the setting. The Western motif, of course, facilitates the lawless quality of this outer space region, and it allows the characters to bounce across a number of cool vistas and encounter a variety of interesting characters. But while the classic Westerns featured noble heroes taming a savage land, Hollywood noirs were more cynical, led by down-on-their-luck characters merely stumbling into larger things. But the bright and colourful 60s aesthetic and sound sells the outer space fun of the adventure. This gives everything in Cowboy Bebop's universe an incredible amount of depth, considering it's only a single-season TV show. The lived-in quality of fictional universes is often aspired to, and Cowboy Bebop nails this in one of the best ways possible. Very little in Cowboy Bebop looks new. Being set in a time where Earth has been largely abandoned, the rest of human civilization seems to make do with repurposed and rebuilt ships, stations, and cities. The Bebop itself is an interplanetary fishing boat, while Spike's fighter is a racing ship with a gun stuck to it. Thanks to the dedicated efforts of the animators, the level of detail which goes into every room, building, prop, or planet is astounding. The metal on guns has been scuffed and scraped, the stone on buildings has eroded, the panels on ships have been banged up and bent. Everything seen here has a history, a past which can be seen on the surface, a visual element which is also expressed in the characters of the show. Spike Spiegel, Jet Black, Faye Valentine, and Edward are all people struggling with their past. Large, distinct personalities with heaps of charisma who bounce off each other in consistently enjoyable ways. I also have to point out, I always choose to rewatch Bebop with the English dub because it's fantastic, one of the best I've ever heard. Steve Blum absolutely kills it in the lead role, and the same goes for the others. It really is a dysfunctional family of characters. Edward, the toddler, Spike and Faye, the angsty teens, and Jet as the father figure trying to hold it all together. The actual bounties themselves usually work merely as framing devices for a more character-driven story to take the spotlight, some of them deeply affecting and others charming and fun. The bang this show gives viewers for their buck is astounding. Virtually every episode guarantees a healthy dose of wholesome laughs, thrilling action, and sincere emotionality. Spike himself is a simultaneously competent and incompetent bounty hunter, far too laid back but also emotionally explosive, an expert martial artist and gunfighter but not so strong in the critical thinking department. His backstory as a former criminal who lost everything for love is pretty heartbreaking, and as much as he wants to escape his past, his nemesis Vicious keeps coming back. Jet Black is a former officer whose personal life and work life betrayed him. Faye Valentine awakens with no identity of her own and subsequently thrown into a life on the run. And finally Edward, who is virtually abandoned by her original family. Much like the aforementioned Joss Whedon space western, Cowboy Bebop is a show about broken people. But nonetheless, they are people we root for. Spike's nonchalant attitude, which often gives way to teenage pettiness, is so amusing. He'll be in the middle of gunfights on the heels of dangerous criminals, and yet his motivation can boil down to wanting something to eat or getting back at someone for messing up his suit. Jet Black, on the other hand, is so dependable. Ultimately, everyone wants Jet to succeed. He's the guy everyone can agree on. He's the most sensible, the most reliable. Even when Spike is acting like a spoiled child, everyone eventually defers to Jet. And gentle giant characters are always a win. Edward is simultaneously the strangest and most empathetic of all the characters. Her obvious brilliance and eccentricity can be pretty intimidating a lot of the time, but she's also the only one who doesn't guard her emotions like the others. She's completely honest about why she wants this life on the Bebop, because it seems fun to her, which makes it all the more touching when she reconnects with her roots and leaves the Bebop for another family. Also, Ein is an adorable floof. Faye Valentine is the quintessential noir femme fatale. Faye's arc throughout the season is easily the most fascinating. She has dealt truly the worst hand in life. Her comfortable life is taken from her during a shuttle accident. When she awakens, she's manipulated and lied to from minute one, and then is forced to go on the run and fend for herself. It's a real testament to her cunning and intelligence that she has survived this long before encountering the Bebop. And while Spike's arc takes precedence in the show, I personally found Faye's to be the most interesting, tragic and uplifting. Just like the folktale Urashimataro which Jet tells to Edward, upon Faye discovering her old life, she is completely unable to reclaim it. But in making this discovery, she is also able to finally move on and create a new future. And it's this deep focus on character which makes Cowboy Bebop so memorable. It's not so much the fast-paced action and charming humour which will stay with you, but the quieter, almost dreamlike moments. Several instances of Cowboy Bebop fade into Ghost in the Shell-like sequences of visual personal reflection, carried beautifully by Yoko Kanno's score. Trying to choose my favourite episodes from this show is extremely tough. Every time I've attempted to pick and choose, I always remember another great episode which I have to mention. But after much trial and error, I think I've narrowed it down, although I'll undoubtedly miss out something terrific. I think the first episode, Asteroid Blues, is the perfect pilot for this show. It efficiently establishes Spike and Jet's dynamic and smoothly gets the audience accommodated into this bizarre, free-sampled sci-fi world. While we get hints of Spike's larger arc in a pre-credits teaser, this episode focuses more on the actual bounties themselves. How the story humanizes them as desperate people down on their luck is the perfect mirror to our protagonists. With just a few wrong moves, the Bebop crew could easily end up in a similar place. This is really just business as usual for Spike and Jet, with Spike being almost completely oblivious until his bounty literally attacks him. But while this may be an ordinary day for Spike, the episode is so brimming with the show's trademark style and flash, it still manages to run the gamut of emotions. It's the ideal introduction to Cowboy Bebop as a show. Ballad of Fallen Angels is the first foray into Spike's deeper backstory, and this sharp left turn is stunning to watch. Up until this point, the show has been a colourful romp throughout space bounty hunts, but in the Ballad of Fallen Angels, it's personal. Seeing Spike switch from his nonchalant, egotistical self to a rage-filled killer out for revenge is pretty shocking, and this darker turn is reflected in the animation slowly losing its vibrancy of colour, but no less beautiful. It's merely the first glimpse at the truly dire life Spike led coming back for him, and it's one hell of a gut punch. Jamming with Edward is a terrific introduction to the eponymous character. Edward's sheer batshittery clashes wonderfully with the doomsday level amount of destruction and intriguingly evolving AI. The Bebop crew are so used to liars and cheats and criminals, it's kinda hilarious to see them confront the warped yet innocent worldview of Edward, and she makes a great addition to the crew. Toys in the Attic is one of those great standalone episodes, once again resting on the great characters. This is one of those give the characters this problem and see what happens episodes. Something which only works with layered, nuanced and enjoyable characters to begin with. And seeing the colourful collection of characters confront a riff on the alien plot is loads of fun. None of them are even remotely prepared for this, so they have to fumble around the ship using what they can to help an injured Jet and combat the extraterrestrial invader. Delightfully absurd, but no less full of the well-directed action and charming humour. Jupiter Jazz Parts 1 and 2 might just be the best Cowboy Bebop has ever made. Sure, it's only the middle chapter in the unfolding Spike vicious plotline, but it's such an intricately constructed story in and of itself. It maintains all the strengths of the show in terms of action and character, but with a visual mastery for developing themes, it's worth a whole review on its own. Jupiter Jazz is a gangland epic packed with philosophy, literary allusions, double-crossing characters, trope subversions. I honestly can't go into this in detail with just a mention among other episodes. It's really an entire second and third act worth of movie material, but delivered as a mid-season finale. Once again, Spike is taken out of his usual routine when his old enemy Vicious reappears, but this time there are far more moving pieces than these two former friends. The inclusion of another scorned party, Gren, casts virtually the entire conflict into new lights, being a mirror of Spike, his lost love Julia, Vicious himself, as well as having his own arc over the course of the two-part episode. It is densely packed and highly moving, featuring one of the finest pieces of Yoko Kanno's score ever. Just total brilliance. Hard Luck Woman is the effective conclusion to Edward and Faye's arcs. Rather than a bombastic, fast-paced thrill ride, instead this episode is tranquil. It takes its time. While its conclusion is tied in with a quirky offbeat adventure of Spike and Jets, Faye is left to wander the wasteland discovering her lost home in life, cementing her place on the Bebop as her best option for taking control of her future. Faye's peaceful conclusion all the more emphasises the true tragedy of the real folk blues. The epic finale of Spike's ultimate showdown with Vicious is an absolute showstopper. There is an inevitability with this downfall. While Faye reconnecting with her past allowed her to move forward, Spike's stubbornness only brings him more pain as he refuses to let go. The final battle and fight sequence is so visceral. Spike's fighting style throughout the show is almost balletic in its movements, but against Vicious the fights become gritty and desperate, and the ambiguity of the ending is simply tortuous. Cowboy Bebop is an anime show like no other, a free sampling of genres to create a colourful, lived-in sci-fi world of Wild West, neo-noir action and adventure. And while the truly exemplary animation brings this world to life in a stylish fusion of genre iconography and tropes, the true strength of the show lies with its characters. This dysfunctional family of broken people struggling to make a new life as their old lives keep coming after them. It's rare for a single season TV show to encompass so much charm, humour, excitement and heartbreak, but this show did it all. And that is why Cowboy Bebop is awesome. Joseph Taylor Bass asks, you make a lot of videos about Star Trek, but do you have any strong feelings about Star Wars? I am a Star Wars fan as well as a Star Trek fan, and in fact, if you go way back in my videos, I did a podcast talking all about the franchise as it was in 2015. The reason I haven't made many videos about Star Wars, however, is because I don't really know what I could add to the conversation. YouTube channels like Eckhart's Ladder or Star Wars Explained make great content going into so much depth with the lore and cover so many topics. I know very little about the expanded universe aside from a handful of comics and games. I do have a special Star Wars video planned to coincide with the release of Episode 9, but overall I don't know what I can add to the conversation on a regular basis which isn't covered better by other larger channels. Maybe people can think of suggestions, but as it stands right now, I just have a lot more to say about other franchises. I can pretty much sum up my thoughts by saying, original trilogy, great, prequel trilogy, fine, the Disney era movies, mostly great. I don't know what else I can really say. If you like my videos, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon to stay up to date on all my new uploads. You can see videos early on my Patreon for as little as $5 a month. Speaking of which, I'd like to thank my patrons David Phelps, Chris Lord, Andy Luke, Larry Bennett, James Vanderhaeg, T. Stoney, L. Carton, and Millie Coleman. Until next time, have a good one. See ya, Space Cowboy.